Welcome on this beautiful Friday morning. I'm so glad people could join us. My name is Melinda Park, and I am a partner at BLG in the Calgary office, and I have been a lawyer practicing in the securities and capital markets area for a number of years. And I look forward to spending this next 45 minutes with you as we talk about all kinds of things that are impacting Alberta companies, the management, and how they're seeing their business plans. This is the second in a series, and it's really interesting how we decided to do this. And we felt that people were missing the organic conversations that happen when you're in an office building, when you're in the community that you normally exist in. That conversation that might not be exactly on point was still really vibrant and important conversation in creative thinking, in looking for solutions, or just brainstorming. The concept of brainstorming became a lot more structured when we all had to move to these distant conversations. And what today is about is having, again, organic conversation that isn't necessarily specific on items, but thematic on what do leaders think about and worry about. I have found, practicing law in Alberta for over 25 years, that our leaders are very creative, and when given the opportunity, find solutions to problems in ways that you probably would have gone, how did they come up with that? And that's such an intriguing way of thinking. And I'm hoping that those who are listening today will listen to the leaders that we have and will say, there's something in here that resonates with me. There's something in here when I'm thinking about my leadership path and vision and how we're taking our company to wherever it needs to be, that there's something in this conversation that helped you or allowed you to have a slightly different conversation with your team. So one of the things that everybody's been talking about is, I mean, you can't turn on the radio without hearing the new normal. And I guess I would suggest, I don't think we've hit a new normal yet. Everybody has been in triage, everybody's been finding a way to survive. But what does that actually mean in the go forward? What will our normal be? We can't have a new normal until we actually know what that normal is going to be. And we have people here today that I think are going to help us talk through some things. I would say that most management teams, if they have not already, are certainly going to be talking about business plans. What is it that you thought was going to work in November 2019 when you were developing your 2020 plan? And what is it that you're going to have to do on a go forward basis? Business plans, while static because it's a picture of time, also have to be organic and living as you deal with whatever that company that you are working with has to deal with. So I think we're going to be able to talk about that a little bit. Some of the questions that we got when we had our invitation to ask questions surrounded specific oil and gas issues. And for those of you that were able to attend our first one, we focused exclusively on how does the oil and gas sector kind of envelop everything that we do in Alberta. And so we're not going to talk about that as much today because I think table stakes for Alberta businesses and national and international companies that touch Alberta is that somehow oil and gas, whether it's just the foundation, whether it's directly on point, whether it's ancillary, somehow it impacts our business. So we're just going to take that as table stakes for today. And I don't think, other than certain examples, that we will really have time to drill down on specific oil and gas type of conversations. But again, after everybody's heard what we have to say today, or if there's something that intrigues you, please send us additional questions. We'd be happy to see if we can get a response to that. So let's get started. I'm really happy to have my guests today and to know that between the four of us, we have probably seen hundreds of deals, some good, some bad, some ugly, and that there's all kinds of information and perspective that's going to come. And just to give everybody a bit of a flavor, I'm going to introduce the three who are going to do the majority of the sharing of perspective. So the first one is Nav Dalawal. Nav is my partner at BLG, and he practices in the corporate commercial area of law. And again, from the structuring and negotiating side of corporate transactions, Nav has seen a lot of different ways to deal with corporate needs, desires, and building, divesting. So he's going to have a lot of really good professional perspective and experiential information to provide. Then we have David Bryan. And David is a partner with PwC Canada, and he is the Private Company Services Alberta Region Leader. So brings a great perspective from the accounting side, but really how we can enhance performance and implement strategies that are to the betterment of private companies and all companies. But I think he's also worked with restructuring and insolvencies. So he's going to have a flavor that's unique. And I think as an advisor, somebody that is going to find very relevant here today. And then really happy to have Terry Freeman join us. And Terry is the former head of investments of ATB Capital. And as of May 2020, is heading the ATB Private Equity Limited Partnership. And Terry, I just think that was a wonderful announcement. I'm really looking forward to being able to inject. I think your capital is $50 million, and there's just really good ideas, I think, that are coming from Alberta, and to see that you're at the head and that we're going to be able to be creative with people that are attending today. And if they have questions about what this venture is, I'm sure you'll have people reaching out to you. But not only that, for those of you who are listening, Terry has a really robust experience on the business side. So when he looks at these transactions, I'm sure that he's going to see at ATB Private Equity, he's coming from a position of knowledge. He's been a CFO, he sits on boards. So it's not just the talking head, it's somebody who has understood what's going on in the boardroom. So I have gone on for a bit, but I wanted to set the stage for what it is that we're going to do today. And we're going to jump right in, because I think most Alberta leaders today and their management teams have gone, we made it through June, through all the crisis that we were dealing with. The sun is shining, well, maybe for an hour or two, and we made it. But really, June turns into July, July turns into August, and we need to have a plan. So I'm going to ask each of you, we'll just start the conversation here. If you're a leader in Alberta, or if you're an advisor to leadership teams in Alberta, what's keeping you up at night when you see business plans and when you see management teams trying to figure out where they should go? And Nav, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Thanks for that introduction. I was glad I went before Terry. Otherwise, you would have just introduced Terry and then another guy. I think to answer your question there about what's the question that we're getting about what's keeping people up at night, or the other question we often get is, what's the pulse out there? What are the feeling you get from talking to all your clients? I think the question has to be answered on a spectrum. And the spectrum for me is a position of relative strength or a position of relative weakness coming out of the the spring and summer that we're in. The companies that are in a position of relative strength, and for some companies, the recovery really has been a V shape. I mean, they've weathered the storm through March and April, and by the time June came around, they were doing really strong numbers, and we were quite satisfied with their recovery. I mean, I'm thinking about, for example, some of the dealer groups that we do work for in the automotive sector. I mean, they've had really a strong recovery, a quick recovery that I think is even surprising to some of them. Their recovery, what they're thinking about is, how do I make use of my position of relative strength? Like, they don't really want to, I mean, they're a little bit shy to put their hands up because of what's going on in the world, but they're trying to look critically at what's going on and trying to get a sense of whether they should be considering M&A. And the M&A that folks are considering, and when they're in a position of strength, is not just reviewing financial statements, but now really what we're seeing is, hey, is there teams of humans, is there management teams, are there project management teams that we want to bring under our tent? And is this an opportunity to not just bring in another company, but to bring in a group of people that we think can add a bunch of value to our company? Or they're looking at truly looking at synergies and saying, all right, if we do an acquisition, what are the synergies that that result from this M&A? And I mean, companies have always looked at that from an M&A perspective, but I think there's a particular emphasis as a result of what's going on. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, I think there's companies in a position of relative weakness that are really just, a little bit like the hamster on the wheel, and they're just spinning and cycling as quick as they can. And what I'm hearing from them is just to try to balance the multitude of factors you have to balance in that type of in a crisis scenario, and whether that's looking at something as severe as like an insolvency or restructuring proceedings, or whether they're looking at dispositions of assets, dispositions of business units, some type of distressed M&A. Some are looking at, how do they look at their capital from can you do like a sale leaseback transaction, disposing of real estate, but just to try to get some capital into the company and set the foundation to be able to even look past kind of the short term.
Thanks. Dave, what would you say keeps your clients up at night, or frankly, when you're advising them, what would it be for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, Melinda, because when this first started at sort of mid-March and people were almost in a panic mode, we saw our clients go to we need to mobilize, like get our people working remotely, get them out of the office, because we really don't know how COVID's going to affect our people and how we do business. So that we were kind of looking at it as a mobilize. And then once that period went through, we saw our clients go through a period of what we were calling sort of stabilize. And okay, what does this mean now? What are our priorities? And we've kind of moved through that phase, and now we're seeing strategize, which is really the third phase. And what I'm hearing from our clients as they enter this strategize phase, and the things that are keeping them awake are, first of all, have I done everything that I can to be ready for my business reopening from both a safety perspective, a people perspective, my relationships with my stakeholders? Have I missed anything? Are we ready as we start to pivot back to being a little bit more normal? And then the second thing that's keeping them awake is, what will my broader industry, or the industry I play in, what will that look like? Who's been eliminated because they didn't survive? What consolidations are going to happen? What markets have changed? Is it going to be beyond Alberta? Do I need to look into broader North America, globally? And so those seem to be the two things that are really keeping our clients awake at night, is really, have I done everything? And what's the world going to look like as we come out of this?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. And then Terry, you have so many hats. I'll let you decide which one you want to put on during the conversation, but what would you say keeps people up?
Well, I'll tell you what keeps me up, and that's balance sheets. Because while there's been all kinds of support programs and deferrals put into place, they're not permanent. So you kick the can down the road on principal and interest with your lender. You've deferred your source deductions in your GST. You've got a PPP loan in the US that may or may not be forgivable. Do you really understand all the obligations that have ended up on your company balance sheet, and can you service them once the wage supports are gone and those deferrals are gone, and all of a sudden you have to ramp up the amount that you're paying back to that lender? I've seen all kinds of variability in how banks are dealing with what I'll call the COVID EBITDA covenant adjustment, where companies are thinking, well, I'm just going to add that all back because nobody really knows, and I've got a kind of a free pass. It's like somebody threw the flag in a football play, and you can just toss it downfield as far as you want. But banks aren't always thinking that way. I had an interaction with one yesterday where they're not allowing the COVID add back. but they're waiving covenants for a time period.
Yeah, for a time period.
For a time period. Whether or not they continue to do that
Yeah.
At the September quarter end or the December quarter end remains to be seen. So, that balance sheet component, really understanding what your obligations are, can you service them, and do you have clarity from your lender about how they're going to deal with it going forward? We've heard, this isn't an ATV thing, but this is just talking to bankers. They're going to start to cull their book after these support programs are gone. They're going to make calls about who's a survivor, who isn't, whose balance sheet is so impaired. They're going to, either force a sale or a consolidation or an insolvency. So you always want to have the ability to make that decision yourself and not be at the mercy of your lender. So
Terry, if I may, I think that's an excellent point, because I'm talking to some lenders on the restructuring side, and what we're seeing is they're gearing up for being really busy in September, and in their special loans groups in particular. And what they're envisioning is, as this government support ends, there's going to be a wave of people that have just reverted back to having, cash flow problems, covenant breaches, because it's kind of being masked right now. And to your point, we're going to see that adjustment, I think, into the fall.
Yeah, so enjoy the summer, because after Labor Day, it's going to suck.
Yeah.
So if we unpack that a little bit, if I just, so people would have had positions of strength, like Nav saying, or you have positions of weakness. All of that will be manifested somewhere on the balance sheet. Then we have, special loans, and we have those things. There's also people who had deals that were kind of percolating along, and they're kind of now on the side of the desk. What do the three of you think? Are those just going to come back and be packaged in the same way they were? Are they completely dead? Once September rolls around and Dave's team is extremely busy, is there going to be all kinds of marriages happening when we see synergies, valuations? What do you think the ones that have been parked on the sides of people's desks are going to look like? Terry, why don't I start with you? Okay, Nat, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think from my perspective, what we've seen at the beginning of the situation, and starting in March, was a lot of the deals that had started continued, and people looked hard at each other and said, does the deal still make sense? But there was a bit of deal momentum there, and for the most part, a lot of them kind of held, not all of them, but a lot of them kind of stuck through, and they were able to find a path to completion. What we're finding now is when people are looking at the deal that's on the corner of the desk, or whether they're looking at kind of opportunistic M&A, or whether they're trying to optimize themselves so that they become an attractive candidate for somebody else, whether it's investment or M&A, that's where it's getting a little bit trickier, and we're seeing valuations drop quite dramatically. And where buyers are in a position and lenders are in a position, where they're really taking a hard look at what your abilities are, and they're looking at things like beyond just the balance sheet. They're looking at your ability to survive through this crisis, what creditworthiness of your customers, what your technology situation looks like. Are you an innovator? So the diligence on these transactions is going a lot trickier. And then if I bring another lens into it, which is the private equity lens, private equity companies are looking at this and really there's dry powder there, but they're really taking a hard look at how do you do a deal in a remote situation when you can't look eyeball to eyeball at the management team that you're wanting to do an investment in. And so while there is still some momentum in the M&A market, it certainly has changed.
I can give you a couple of examples in deals I was involved with and currently am involved with. So there was one where it was a very robust process, started well before COVID, had 8 really excellent expressions of interest, all from private equity, a couple of strategics, majority from large private equity firms. And what we saw fairly early on post-COVID was half of them withdrew immediately because they were more concerned about their existing portfolio the requirement to shore up their balance sheets with additional cash, and just the level of uncertainty in what was going to happen with the business they were targeting caused them to, at least put a pause on it. The other thing, they were really, the ones that continued for a time period, were really focused on how does this business adapt to working remotely, and does it have the ability to operate online, or is it hamstrung by the way it's currently configured. So in the end, we ceased that process because we saw we weren't going to catch the falling knife on value, and we knew the business would recover. And assuming there is a post-COVID reality next year, that we would just re-engage at that point in time. Another one of our ATB private equity portfolio companies that was engaged in a merger discussion with a quasi-competitor. They operate in different geographies, but businesses are substantially the same. So they really understand the dynamics of what's happened to each other's businesses. They've all applied for the various support programs. They all got their BDC loans in place. So they've gone through what Dave described as that kind of normalization piece or stabilization piece, and now they're looking at the strategy. It still makes sense for them to combine. Yes, the EBITDA numbers are lower, the debt's a bit higher, but together they're stronger. And the rationale for continuing with that transaction is holding, and we've started that process again. For me, looking at new deals, I was thinking about that when we were preparing for this today. We did a deal just before COVID. So do I curse myself for that? Not really, because it's a good management team. I used to curse myself for doing a deal when oil went to $10 a barrel in 1998. So it's not the end of the world. You adapt and you overcome, and you pivot, and you do all the things that you need to do. Would I do a deal now? I would, to Nav's point, I would do a lot more detailed due diligence and really understand how the business operates in a work from home or quasi work from home methodology for your staff, and then really focus on how you reach your customers. An energy services business probably doesn't change that much. The driller is still going to be on the rig. The truck is still going to be going down the road. But if you're a retailer or you're involved in the services business, can you actually continue to target those customers and get them to send you money for whatever you're providing?
Yeah, I agree with you, Terry. When this first started, our deals team certainly saw people tap the brakes a little bit. But now what we're seeing is the deals, we expected our deals team to really slow down, but that really hasn't happened. Because to your point, buyers are looking and saying, okay, how has that company weathered through this? And the term we're using is, how future ready are they for post-COVID, and what does that look like? Whether it's use of technology, doing business differently, what does that really look like? And so the deals are still moving forward, but the vision of the future has changed a little bit. It's like looking into a foggy crystal ball. Nobody knows what it's going to look like, but going in the future, but they're looking to see how prepared is that management team? Have they taken advantage of changing the way they do business? Because it was a time for opportunity as well. On the restructuring side, interestingly, we're getting lots of calls from sort of that distressed investor, that kind of vulture that is interested in deeply discounted assets. We haven't seen those run through our practice yet, but the calls are starting, and they're coming from across Canada and from the US as well. So that's an interesting perspective that's really just started in the last couple of weeks.
Interesting. You guys kind of talked about innovation and what companies can do. And I was listening to a speaker, and he was mentioning how innovation used to be radical. And it was kind of like a team that was working on innovation, and it was like 1 to 3 to 5 years. And right now, innovation is being able to pivot quickly with what you have, and being able to take things that are right in front of you. You don't have the 3 years, you don't have the 5 years. And when I listen to what you guys say, I actually think he was spot on. It's how quickly can you pivot with what you actually know and have to deal with the unknown. And if you're looking at business plans, if you're looking at M&A structures, I presume then that's the type of management team you're looking for. Nav, I'm not sure if it was you who mentioned it, but the creativity that a management team brings to the table is as valuable as the actual asset. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think so. I think people are looking at M&A in a different way. I mean, I think the M&A that's still attractive to Terry's point is, you know, synergies, or where there's a value add where folks are saying, you know what, I look at the assets, I look at the company, and I recognize that I'm willing to pay something for those group of people because I think they add something to my organization. So that certainly is an element. I mean, it's not the only element that folks are looking at, but I think that is certainly an element and a consideration in terms of what's driving M&A. And then I did want to kind of piggyback on Dave's point there, where on the vulture kind of financiers and distressed lenders that are kind of out there. I think that's true, and I think you're seeing more of that over the last few weeks, month or so. And we've seen, to Dave's point, you know, there's some coming from the U.S. We've seen a few come from China and overseas. I don't know how serious they are just yet, or if they're just poking and prodding and seeing if they can get a great deal. But the thing that we tell all of our clients is to be really, really cautious, because sometimes when you're in a distressed situation and you're trying to be innovative and you're saying, you know what, I just need to be able to get onto that next step of the ladder. I just need to survive here for a little bit, and then we'll reassess, or we can renegotiate with these first lenders once we're in a better position of strength. I would really, really caution against those types of transactions, because what you're doing is solving a short-term problem and creating a really long-term serious problem. And I know Terry has examples, chatting with him earlier this week, about companies that have jumped to a solution that may actually take off a bunch of solutions from the table down the road.
Yeah, you get boxed into a corner by terms of debt where the lender is somewhat predatory in tying up all your security, and they're taking things like warrants in the process, so that, you know, they get in a chunk of your equity, and you figure out the real cost of the debt is substantially higher than you might first envision. Maybe you don't think your equity is worth anything, which is sort of the sad state of affairs as well. But that's also a reality. You know, I'm aware of a few situations where, you know, you've going into COVID, you're probably on the edge from a debt perspective. This has made it very challenging to service. So now you've got management teams that are looking at it and saying, there's nothing in this for me. Why am I working for the next 10 years just to pay off the lender and create no equity value? So that's a very dangerous situation for the company, because if you get people abandoning ship and your stuff just goes to Ritchie Brothers, nobody makes any money. So we have situations not only on the lending side, but also where you've got management teams more in a public setting where options are underwater. They don't want to leave. They've got, you know, sort of egregious severance packages that become impediments to a transaction. Where, you know, I've seen one where, you know, stock price has gone through the floor. All of a sudden, the payout to the management team to do a deal is half of the value of the company. So how do you ever transact in that situation? It's impossible. So I think that's not anything to do with innovation, but I think in the energy services space, if you're not technologically leading and innovative, then, you know, you're nothing. Our Beyond Energy Services portfolio company, which is a managed pressure drilling business, has awesome technology. So it's actually grown market share through this downturn and grown the number of rigs it's on, even though the activity's far less. So you have to be that. So when I'm looking at management teams and interviewing people, if they're not figuring out how to use virtual reality and augmented reality and AI and ML in building their business out, then they're not paying attention to what's going to happen to them, you know, from a technology perspective, never mind COVID. So they need to get their act together. And if they kind of glaze over when I use those terms, you know, they're not up to speed.
And Terry, maybe we're talking about the same company here, but one of the companies that I've been working with in Edmonton, what they did is they kind of went into a bit of a hibernation mode, and then started to look at some of those projects they had deferred, internal projects, and upgrading their technology. They also took the opportunity with their staff to say, we know you're not busy, so it's up to you to start upgrading and upskilling yourself so that when we come back, our team is, again, I keep using the term future ready, but the people have taken the time to be upskilled. The business has taken the time to prepare itself for online platforms. They had a fairly extensive branch network, and they're looking and saying, well, we probably don't need that anymore because our customers have moved to and become comfortable with our online platform. And so they really turned it into an opportunity and ensured that even some of their delivery drivers had upskilled using new apps and delivery, recording how they're doing deliveries. And so as they're coming out of this, they're leaner, they're future ready, and they're really looking forward to business, recommencing because they're actually leaner and better prepared than they were going in.
And
I think it's a, sorry, I was just going to say, Melinda, I think it's a really good point, because the sense of one of the things that has come out of all of this is the ability to folks to pivot so quickly, and they found that there's no more borders. And for some folks that have end customers, are working with the end customer, they recognize that they don't necessarily, to Dave's point, need to be in brick and mortar or need to be face to face, and that folks working from home are generally more available and more accessible, and are available to chat on Zooms and webinars, and look into the how messy your house is in the background while you have a conversation about planning. But I think that's a really good point, Dave.
And that's kind of what I was going to build on, which is, I think Terry said it may be COVID, but COVID isn't the real reason. If companies and their management teams aren't able to adapt, and as we said, pivot and innovate, kind of put them side by side, even in the normal course, whatever that means, they were going to get left behind. And maybe, as Dave is suggesting, what COVID has done is just accelerated that process and accelerated the success of forward thinking and future ready management teams, regardless of the asset that they are playing with in terms of what their actual industry is. I find that really intriguing to say COVID is there, but really your lens had to be much more forward thinking anyway. And that leads me to another leader that I had a chance to listen to, and what he was saying is one of the greatest dangers, and Terry, you would probably see this when you're assessing companies, is that if companies get so focused on COVID survival or pandemic management, they're completely losing sight of what the long-term, and long-term probably doesn't mean the same thing that it used to be 2 years ago. Like long-term of 5 and 10 years really may now be 3 years. But if you're not having somebody in your team looking at what a long-term vision for your company and its people are, regardless of COVID and the pandemic, you probably weren't going to be somebody that's intriguing, let's say, to ATB private equity. Is that a fair comment?
I think it is. And I can have a couple of examples of companies that we're working with where one has pivoted very quickly. So this is our Glassmasters windshield repair business. They went immediately to mobile service because their brick and mortar stores were closed. So, they had a tenuous April and into May because we had a very long winter, and they really don't get busy until the street sweepers come out and start breaking people's windshields. And nobody was driving. But as soon as the weather conditions returned to normal and things opened up a little bit more, their business rebounded to above last year's levels, and they're making more money, which is just intriguing. So they had that inherent ability to change their business to something that was a bit more responsive, and acted on it very quickly and survived as well. When I think about universities and how they were monkeying around with online learning for like 5 years with intransigent deans and profs that didn't want to do it, and when they had to, they did it in a week. Mm-hmm. So it's important to have those action plans and be ready to respond to these things, because there'll be something else. There'll be a COVID-20 or some kind of black swan event that changes how your business needs to perform. So agility, innovation, and looking into that future piece is something every organization needs to have.
Yeah, and Terry, when I look at PwC as a specific example, we're, over 100 years old, and the world of accounting, contrary to popular belief, is not really that dynamic. And one of the things it's forced us to do is think about how we did business. So for example, we don't need to send big audit. We've realized we don't need to send big audit teams out to clients because we can use technology. We don't need to be traveling all over the place for internal meetings because now we're comfortable with these types of calls. And even things like, do we actually need printers in our offices going forward? Because nobody's printing now. We're all getting quite comfortable with our at-home technology. And it was interesting, I would say, and I'm guilty of this. 6 months ago, if somebody said they were working from home, I'd sort of roll my eyes and go, oh yeah, sure, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But now we're all very comfortable with working from home. We've actually haven't seen our productivity dip. It's actually improved. And so it makes us think about, well, maybe the silver lining in all this is we can change how we do our business and how we interact with each other. And it's not just about saving costs, it's just about envisioning how the world can look differently for us.
No, that's really, when we look at agility and innovation, Dave, you're right. What it forced us to do is something we always could have done, just chose not to because necessity wasn't there. And I think that's one thing that as human beings we sometimes forget. I'll stack lawyers up against accountants in terms of liking the tried and true. I mean, there's a reason we are governed by precedents. And but I think when we're there, we're actually quite creative beings. And sometimes when we're forced to that, I'd say our management teams are able to bring things to the table that they probably didn't even think they were capable. And then the people delivering that are also very capable of doing it if we trust them and able to be able to do that. And Terry, probably when you're looking at transactions, and maybe even more importantly, when you sat at the board table, do you think there's going to be a difference the way the board is going to look at you said something last week when we were talking or earlier, is that nobody's gone through this before, right? All of this is forward thinking conversation. None of us are able to say, well, the last 5 deals I did were exactly like this. When it comes to valuation, when it comes to synergies, when it comes to balance sheets, or what our lenders are going to do in the future. How do you see boards actually sitting at the table now trying to be creative?
Well, I think they try to be creative by pushing management to be creative. A board is really not there to run the company or make that innovative pivot. They're just there to encourage management to do it, make introductions to the things that are innovative that they've seen in other companies, and proceed from there. I sat in a strategic planning session for a board I'm on. They have a very thorough process. So we actually had 2 3-hour sessions with all the top management and mid-level management, and talked about having a cohort within the company that simply tries to disrupt it. Probably one of the most interesting stories about disruption was the people that had Match.com dedicated an entire floor of their operation in New York to try and destroy it. So they figured somebody was going to innovate them out of the business sooner or later. So they turned these people loose. What they came up with was Tinder. So now they own that part of the market as well. So you think about innovation is also being resilient to disruption and doing it to yourself before somebody does it to you. I think about our electrical business that we have using augmented reality. So they've got a technician in the field wearing goggles and an expert sitting in a tower somewhere that knows the plant that they're working in and can advise that person and see it right, live and make the adjustment. If you go to any, driller in Calgary or Houston, there's somebody sitting in front of half a dozen computer screens watching what's going on. And that's one person that's probably replaced 20 people that used to be on the rig floor. And that's in directional, it's in drilling, it's in everything. Eventually there'll be nobody on that rig floor. That's the objective of technology from a safety perspective and a speed perspective.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would take, like the different view that I've taken, it's anecdotal for sure, but through this process, and because people have had to be so resilient and agile, one of the, I think, good takeaways has been the level of communication between management teams and their board. And while I think it's true that nobody's been through this, this type of a scenario, pandemic situation before, there is a lot of bright people at the table. And when you actually start communicating, when you bring in your lenders to the conversation, when you bring in your board, when you put your management team all together, it does allow for a lot of great creativity. And I think, and I'm hoping one of the takeaways going forward from a governance perspective is that type of communication will continue going forward, because I think there is, that is how solutions are generated, and it's certainly how I think some of the stronger performers through this have weathered the storm, is to rely on the various opinions, and especially as teams have gotten more and more lean, as people are culling the herd a little bit as they've gone through this, they've had to find a way to be more efficient in their governance and in their operations. I
think you're right, Nav, and we've gone through this process, back to Dave's first point about everybody being scared to death at the start and kind of normalizing and now strategizing. A lot of companies were having weekly board calls because they just didn't know what was going to happen, and what was how low business would get, and then it kind of went to every 2 weeks, and now we're back into really a normal rotation as people have figured things out. But you're right, there's lots of good exchange of ideas, and with just a smaller group of people all the way through an organization, you do have to rely maybe to a greater extent on the board to be assistive when they can.
So we only have a few minutes left, and Dave, I was thinking I'd give you one last thought. You have used the words future ready throughout this conversation, and those I think really have to resonate with people who are listening and people who are looking at stuff. So if I gave you 1 minute, is there something about being future ready that you think you can summarize for us, or give us incentive? Cheer us on.
That's a big responsibility. I'm not sure I'm up to the task. But again, just from trying to turn a obviously a negative global situation into a positive one, I would say don't waste this opportunity to re-envision what your business can look like. There's an expectation that business will be different coming out. So take that opportunity to upskill your people, look at different technologies, think about things like your branch network. And to Terry and Nav's point, it's really important to engage with your stakeholders, whether that's your customers, whether that's your employees, your board, your bankers, and let them know that they'll understand that your plan is not perfect, because nothing's perfect right now. But to let them know that you're thinking differently and that you're thinking about what the future is going to look like, and you're trying to be ready, and you're able to pivot. And so engaging with those people, we all want to help each other, because it gets thrown out all the time that we're in this together, and I think that's true. And so if you engage with those people, you can pick up new ideas, you can hear what they have to say. And some people, like your banker, it makes them very comfortable to know that you're thinking differently and you're thinking about the future.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end. And I'd like to thank Dave and Terry and Nav for giving us their time. And I love that we are talking about being future ready, that everybody's got their eyes towards what's coming and not what has happened. And if anybody who was able to participate today has any further questions, our contact information is going to be up on the screen. Give us a call. We look forward to helping Albertans and leaders really not just survive, but thrive. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next one. And that will be more on human capital. So thank you again. Have a great weekend, and best of luck to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Melinda.
Thanks, everyone.